Joints are so important because they are the thing that, yes, allows us to move, and they're also kind of the most fragile part of this whole movement scenario. So when you're exercising, if you're not thinking about protecting your joints, you're probably doing things to encourage the degradation of your joints.
Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we're coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg in Schaumburg, Illinois. Now, at Muscle Activation Schaumburg, we believe your health is your most valuable asset. Your health is one of the biggest influencers of the quality and quantity of time that you have. And while there are many aspects of health, our expertise is exercise. Exercise has been proven time and again to not only improve your health, but also increase your longevity and improve your quality of life. And if you are looking to increase your longevity and improve your quality of life in 2020, we have an event that you are going to want to check out. It's called the Schaumburg Health Summit, and it's coming up April 4th, 2020. Julie, tell them more about it.
So on April 4th, 2020, we are hosting the Schaumburg Health Summit again. This is going to be 8 keynote speakers talking about different aspects of health, something that they specialize in, to educate you on what you can do to start impacting your health, from mental health, nutrition, physical health, things of that nature. And we're also going to be having sponsors around the room where they are going to be doing fun activities, giving away free stuff, free coupons. So it'll be tons of fun. Make sure you check out the event at schaumburghealthsummit.com. Early this January, we are going to be releasing the speaker lineup. So keep your eyes peeled.
Oh, yeah. Now, if you are listening to this today when it comes out, Happy New Year's. Happy 2020, happy new decade, happy new month. And today is often the day where so many people set their New Year's resolutions for the things that they want to accomplish this year. And very, very frequently, one of those resolutions tends to be somewhat health related. Oh, I'm going to get back in the gym. I'm going to start to lose some weight. I'm going to start exercising. And this is something that we see often. And when people go and they start working out for the first time, there can be some issues that come up. And those issues can often be kind of orthopedic in nature, meaning their joints may be starting to bug them, meaning they might be starting to feel achy and beat up and sore while they're working out or after they're working out. And this can be a strong deterrent from continuing to work out. So today, we want to talk about kind of your orthopedic system. We want to talk about your joints. And we want to talk about joint health because oftentimes joint health is completely overlooked when it comes to exercise, yet it is highly influenceable by exercise, both positively and negatively. So if you feel like you want to kickstart your new workout routine, make sure to give this episode a full listen so you can learn about what you need to do in order to make sure your joints stay healthy, in order to make sure your joints stay strong while you're working out, not only for this year, but for the rest of forever.
You're right, Charlie. The joints are such a big area when it comes to exercise. And I think it's often an area, again, like you said, overlooked in its participation in movement. And actually, all movement comes from joints. I mean, if we didn't have joints, our skeletal system wouldn't be able to move. You know, we always think about motion coming from our muscles. And yes, muscles are kind of the generator of motion, but motion wouldn't actually happen if there weren't joints. And joints are so important because they are the thing that, yes, allows us to move. And they're also kind of the most fragile part of this whole movement scenario. So when you're exercising, if you're not thinking about protecting your joints, you're probably doing things to encourage the degradation of your joints, which, you know, again, is like, oh, whoa, I never heard that before. It's kind of weird to think about. But joints actually are the most fragile because when joints get damaged or injured, or a lot of times when the tissues of the joint that live in the joint are degrading, they do not regenerate by themselves. Whereas, for example, if you were to damage or injure a muscle tissue, muscles are excellent at at recovering and bouncing back after injury. So muscles are really good at that. Joints, not so much. So we really do have to start thinking about how can I protect my joints? How can I keep them functional and healthy? And how can I keep the tissues of the joint and the properties of the joint working their best?
Yeah, this is a really big thing for your longevity of exercise. So let's dive right into this discussion. First of all, kind of talking about, well, what is joint health? Well, if we're going to talk about what joint health is, maybe we should start with like what a joint is. And, maybe it's just assumed that everybody knows what a joint is, but let's talk about like the different components of a joint and then what it means to keep each of those healthy. So when we're saying a joint, okay, specifically, we're talking about synovial joints within your body, all right? And there are 5 key characteristics or component parts of a synovial joint, all right? First of all, it has hyaline cartilage, all right? This is a really big one, because it is this tissue that lines the ends of your bones. And what it allows the bones to do is rub over top of each other without you feeling them. All right, it's a low friction surface that allows your bones to kind of glide over top of one another, and also it has some shock absorption properties. So this hyaline cartilage is a really important tissue. Secondly, there's a joint capsule and a joint cavity that the joint sits in. Okay, the joint cavity is where one of the bones sits in the other bone, and then the capsule lines one of the bones and kind of helps provide some structural stability to the joint itself. And then additionally, there's something called synovial fluid and synovial membrane within the joint itself. Okay, and both of those have strong components as far as making sure that that hyaline cartilage stays healthy. So when we're thinking about a joint, we're not just thinking about like knee, shoulder, back, hip. Like we want to be thinking about, okay, well, what are the different component parts of a synovial joint? And so that was the hyaline cartilage, the joint capsule, the joint cavity, the synovial fluid, and the synovial membrane. And if we're going to talk about promoting joint health and doing exercise to promote joint health, how can our exercise influence those different things? And what would we need to do with our exercise in order to make sure that those different component parts are working as optimally as they can?
Now, the biggest thing that we have to be thinking about when we think about these component parts are, what are the areas that break down? Like, what are the breakdownable parts? And the one that you're probably thinking of already, and you're completely correct in thinking this, is the cartilage. And it's the thing that I think gets the most press. It's like, oh, I have, if you get arthritis or the first stages of arthritis, it's when that cartilage is wearing down. Now, like Charlie said, this cartilage has really low friction. That means it's super slippery. I've even heard an analogy that it's more slippery. Its coefficient of friction, or I guess we could call its slipperiness, is more slippery than ice melted and sliding around. And that's pretty slippery. Now, this tissue is so specialized that it actually doesn't have any nerve endings in it, which is really weird and unique to this tissue in the body, because almost every area of your body has nerve tissue, and this hyaline cartilage does not have nerve tissue. And we are so happy about that, most people, because it's the thing that makes it so that when your joints are moving well, you're healthy, nothing's wrong with your joint tissue, you don't feel your joints, right? You never notice your knee unless you're having a knee issue, and one of those issues could be wearing away of cartilage. And the reason why you start noticing it when it's not doing well is because the bone that's underneath of that cartilage has tons of nerve endings. So that doesn't feel very good when something is pushing on that, or if you are told that you have quote unquote bone on bone, means that the cartilage has worn away. So the nerveless area is now worn away. So now it's this nervy, bony tissue on another nervy, bony tissue, which just doesn't feel that good. So the wear downable part of the joint is highly thought to be the cartilage, and this cartilage is the thing that makes our joints feel very functional, feel good, feel mobile, and it is the thing that allows kind of our joints to glide easily. again, we have to be mindful of we can't let this stuff wear out, because without intervention right now, there's a lot of research going on with like stem cell therapy and things like that, which is really cool. But right now, our bodies do not regenerate once we've worn this tissue out.
Well, Julie, that's a really great point, because, on the one hand is like, all right, the hyaline cartilage isn't innervated, so we can't feel it there, but that also means that oftentimes we can't feel it wearing away, which means, we don't really know the exact health of our hyaline cartilage until it's almost too late, until it becomes noticeable, at which point the degradation has been happening for years and years and years and decades in many cases. I know I had a client in today, and, we're just doing some kind of single leg stuff, and she could kind of hear her knee being a little bit crunchy. It wasn't bothering her, but it was making a sound. And saying, that's a sign that the hyaline cartilage is starting to wear away. Now, she couldn't feel it, but, there's definitely some structural changes that are happening within the joint itself that are indicating that, hey, you know what? We need to start taking care of this sooner rather than later to make sure that it doesn't get worse. And so often, like the snap, crackle, pops that we hear, that we feel, we just, relate those to old age. Oh, there's nothing we can do about it. And so we don't pay it any mind. And then all of a sudden, one day over the course of decades, it turns into full-blown arthritis. And now we're really hurting. So, we're not saying that the process of degradation can necessarily be reversed, but there are certain things that you can do with your exercise and, outside of exercise to potentially slow the process down and, start to really promote the health of your joints.
Great. So we're starting to dive into this cartilage conversation, and having healthy cartilage is very important for joint function, and that has really been our focus this week. So what needs to happen to keep this hyaline cartilage healthy? Well, when I think about tissues being healthy, and let's just think like muscle tissue, muscles contract and relax and blood flows in and out. And that blood flow is really important for, delivering nutrients, filtering nutrients and toxins out, and also filtering out byproducts of the work that, the muscle is doing. Now, here's the thing. I did tell you that the hyaline cartilage does not have nerve innervation. It also does not have blood flow. So that's another unique property of the hyaline cartilage. So I brought up this whole blood flow to the muscle thing to give you this idea of there's no blood flow to hyaline cartilage. For hyaline cartilage to actually get its nutrients, to filter out toxins, and to stay healthy, what it actually does is a specialized process called imbibition. Now, imbibition it happens from the joint, and through this action is how fluid gets pushed in and out of the tissue, because it does not get it from blood flow. It doesn't have, remember, the innervation from nerves. Now, the way I usually describe imbibition to my clients is I describe it kind of like it's the action of a sponge. And you're like, wait, what? What's the action of a sponge? Well, think about this. You got a nice dry sponge and you dunk it in a bucket of water, and all the bubbles start coming out. And then if you took your hand and squished the sponge, a whole bunch more bubbles would come out. And then when you released it, then the sponge would fill with water. And if I kept doing that, like squeeze it, then the water that's currently in the sponge would go out. Then I release it, new water would go in. Squeeze, release, squeeze, release. If you can envision this, water is going in and out of the sponge, in and out, in and out, in and out. This is kind of how imbibition works in a joint. When there is pressure on the hyaline cartilage, or force, we could say, the tissue is kind of like squished, and then when that force is let go or changed, then fluid can return into that hyaline cartilage. And the fluid that goes in there is the synovial fluid that lives inside of that joint capsule, in that joint cavity area. So when you're thinking about getting fluids in and out of the hyaline cartilage to keep this tissue healthy, we're kind of thinking of a rhythmic or a temporary squishing and releasing of this tissue so that the fluid can go in and out. Now, this squishing and releasing now has to happen on all of the hyaline cartilage everywhere on that joint for it to happen or for that tissue to stay healthy. Now, if you think about the surface of a joint, there is some good surface area. So we have to be having imbibition happen at all places of the surface area of the joint.
Yeah, so if we're thinking about this in terms of, okay, what does a joint need to stay healthy? Or it needs that imbibition to happen. And Julie, to your point, all right, if a large part of the contact area of the joint is covered by hyaline cartilage, then that means that we need to be having that imbibition process happen, through a large range of motion, and preferably like as much motion as the joint can, structurally tolerate and the neuromuscular system can allow for. And, because that's going to be what allows that hyaline cartilage to stay healthy. But not only that, part of that imbibition process, like you're saying, is, the force going through the hyaline cartilage. So we need to make sure that we are having force kind of go through the joint in, large ranges of motion as well. Again, safely and with control and, respecting the integrity of the neuromuscular system and the structural integrity of the joint and the opportunities that those two systems provide. But if we're thinking about, okay, well, what's going to keep our joints healthy? Exercising with larger ranges of motion and making sure that we are loading those larger ranges of motion would seem like it would be a potential benefit, as long as, we're not compromising the structure of the joint or the integrity of the neuromuscular system in the process, because that's going to ultimately kind of end up doing more harm than good.
Absolutely, Charlie. And I think the thing that most of us miss in this picture is that we always think of like, oh, if I need to keep my joints healthy, yes, range of motion. But then a lot of us don't really use loaded range of motion. And like you said, that is such an important piece of it. And reason being is that it's what allows that tissue to get imbibed. It allows imbibition into that joint. So we do need to have loaded or resisted range of motion in large ranges so that we're able to get the imbibition on as much of the surface area of that joint as possible to keep the hyaline cartilage as healthy as possible. So if you're listening to this, you might be starting to think, hold on a second. I thought that I got some of this arthritis or the first stages of arthritis from wear and tear of the joint. So now you're telling me I should wear it more? Yeah, it's a great question. So it's funny because hyaline cartilage, the way it is kept healthy is the same way that it can get worn out, potentially. Right? Now, there are certain ways, and we're going to get into this in our action steps, things that you can start doing, that you can be more mindful to maybe skew your activities and skew your exercise and skew your input into your joints so that maybe it's less wearing and maybe it's more health promoting.
Yeah, no, and to your earlier points, Julie, is the idea of kind of loaded range of motion. I want to make sure that it's understood that loaded range of motion doesn't necessarily mean using super heavy weights and using a whole bunch of motion while you're using super heavy weights. I mean, shoot, the mass of your arm would be kind of loading your joints. So you can use external load, but that's not always necessary. Your muscles are going to be putting a ton of force into your joints, just kind of overcoming the mass of your limbs. But what we're talking about is making sure that you are moving your joints, as much as neuromuscularly you can and structurally you're able to. But then in addition to the motion, adding external load will help to kind of get more force going through the joint from that perspective. So I don't want, anybody sitting there thinking, oh, well, they're saying, I need to use loaded range of motion, so that necessarily means I need to go super heavy. It doesn't. You can build yourself up to it, and using greater loads and using heavier weights may prove to be extremely beneficial for you. But it's not like if you don't use heavy loads, then there isn't going to be any benefit. There will be plenty of benefit that can be gleaned from exercising in the manner that we're going to tell you.
So let's give you some applicable tips that you can be doing with your motion or your structured activities or at your gym time if you are a gym person. The two things that we're going to recommend is, number one, to be using full range of motion, which is what we've been talking about. The second one is to be using different planes of motion that the joint allows. Okay, so let's talk about what this means. So you go to the gym and you decide that you're going to work on shoulders. So one of the motions that the shoulder can do is glenohumeral extension. So that you might work that by using a lat pull down machine. So your arms go up and then you pull them all the way down. Another thing the shoulder can do is shoulder adduction. So the way that you could work both of these is these would make the shoulder move in two different planes. So the way you could work these are you could go on the lat pull down machine and do lat pull downs with your elbows staying parallel to each other. So kind of your elbows would point forward as you pull down on the first one to work shoulder extension. And then you could simply rotate your arms so that your elbows are now pointing to the sides, to either sides, and then you could pull, and then as you pull, your elbows would then kind of bend out to the sides, and you would almost be making like a miniature snow angel, that style. So that would be working the same joint, the glenohumeral joint or the shoulder joint, in two different planes. Now this is really important for covering surface area in the joint because this will allow different spots of the hyaline cartilage to get that force application, that imbibition type thing that we've been talking about.
Great. Yeah. So take those two tips, the using full range of motion and using different planes of motion for the same joint, and start to apply them to your workouts. And if you want to see a video demonstration of how we did this for the lower body, for the hips, make sure to check out the 2 Minute Tuesdays video that came out yesterday, which can be found on our blog, on Facebook, and on Instagram, as well as on YouTube. So check out those platforms for that video to see a video demonstration of, what we mean by making sure you're using full range of motion and what we mean by doing exercises in different planes of motion for the same joint. Because those two things will be majorly important in order to make sure that your joints stay healthy while you're exercising in 2020 and while you're exercising forever. So who do you know that needs to hear this episode? Who do you know that feels like they're struggling with their joint health? Feels like their joints are not functioning as well as they could, or feels like, you know what, my joints are really starting to become achy or painful. Share this episode with them so they can learn some things that they can start doing with their exercise in order to improve the overall health of their joint. And while you're online, if you wouldn't mind, head on over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. This is season 3 now of this podcast. This is the start of the 3rd year. We've done 2 complete years, 2 complete seasons of this podcast. So if you're enjoying it, let us know. Give us that rating and review on iTunes. To date, we've had right around 35,000 downloads of this podcast, and it's been so much fun putting this out, and finding more people to listen to this podcast is such a gift for us because it allows more people to understand how to exercise in a manner that's going to promote their health, that's going to promote their longevity, and it's going to promote the function and improve their quality of life overall. So if you found value in this episode today, head on over to iTunes, leave us that rating and review. It only takes a couple minutes, and we are so appreciative and grateful for it. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a great day, a great week, a great month, a great year, a great decade, and we'll talk with you all next week.